At 1:47 a.m., the doorbell camera had been disconnected. At 2:12 a.m., motion was detected, but no footage was available.
Brian Entin said it plainly. No hedging. No speculation. No carefully worded maybe or possibly or sources suggest. He said it like a man who had spent weeks watching evidence stack on top of evidence until the pile became undeniable. He said the FBI knows who took Nancy Guthrie. Let that land for a moment. Not that they have a lead. Not that they're narrowing it down. Not that they're pursuing persons of interest. He said they know. And if that is true, then everything that has looked like silence over the past 87 days looks completely different now. The press conferences that never happened. The suspect who was never named. The weeks of what felt like nothing. None of it was confusion. None of it was failure. It was preparation. Quiet, deliberate, methodical preparation for something that ends in a courtroom. But here is where it gets complicated. Because the moment most people point to when they talk about a breakthrough in this case,
what investigators found when they got there set the tone for everything that followed. Her phone was still inside the house. Her medication was still inside the house. Her shoes were still inside the house.
The Bitcoin wallet message from February 10th was never what it looked like on the surface. It was never a ransom communication. It was never proof that whoever took Nancy was ready to deal. It was something else entirely. Something that only makes sense when you understand how the FBI operates in the dark spaces of a case like this. And understanding that one moment, that single message placed inside a Bitcoin wallet on a cold February morning, changes the entire shape of this investigation. This is day 87. Nancy Guthrie has still not been found. No suspect has been named publicly. No motive has been confirmed on record. And yet the people closest to this case, the retired agents, the former profilers, the investigators who have spent careers inside rooms where these decisions get made, they are not talking like people waiting on answers.
Some questions about some of this new information that's come out in the Nancy Guthrie investigation and some of the information that I've learned from some of the profilers that I talked to. And I wanted to see, like, as an agent, how you would put that into action actually with the investigation.
They are talking like people waiting on timing. There is a difference. And that difference is everything. For anyone coming to this case for the first time, here is what you need to know. Nancy Guthrie is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, the NBC News anchor and co-host of the Today Show. Nancy was dropped off at her home in the Catalina foothills area of Tucson, Arizona on the night of January 31st at approximately 9:50 in the evening. She was 73 years old. She lived alone. The following morning, she did not appear for a scheduled church live stream. Family members drove to the house around 11 a.m. They found no sign of her. They called 911 at noon. What investigators found when they arrived was not the scene of a random break-in. Her phone was still inside. Her medication was still inside. Her shoes were still inside. The back doors had been propped open.
Well, I don't think we know that there was no response. There was no response that was visible to us.
And on the front porch, blood. Tested. Confirmed as Nancy's DNA. Then came the timeline that changed everything. At 1:47 in the morning, the doorbell camera was disconnected. At 2:12, motion was detected, but there was no footage. At 2:28, her pacemaker stopped syncing with her Apple devices. 41 minutes. That was the window. And whoever stepped into that window came prepared. They knew the camera. They knew the layout. They moved with the kind of calm that does not belong to someone acting on impulse. Hi viewers. Here is a question that has divided everyone following this case from the beginning. Do you think the FBI already knows exactly who took Nancy Guthrie and is simply waiting for the right moment to act? Yes or no, leave it in the comments right now. Within days of Nancy's disappearance, the ransom notes arrived.
This is not something where we're going to play the game where you just dictate terms to us, because it's that whole thing. Well, this is your only mother, you want her back, so you better meet our terms.
Not quietly, not through a private channel, not delivered to the family in a way that kept law enforcement out of it. They went to television stations. TMZ received one. 2 Tucson news stations received others. The notes demanded millions of dollars in Bitcoin. 2 deadlines were set. February 5th. Then February 9th. Both passed. No confirmed payment. No follow-up from whoever sent them. Then a man named Derek Kalela sent 2 text messages to members of the Guthrie family. The messages read, "Did you get the Bitcoin?" He was arrested. He had been following the case on television and pulled the family's contact information from a website. He had nothing to do with the abduction. His trial is set for June 23rd at the federal courthouse in Tucson. His case is entirely separate from what happened to Nancy. But the notes that went to the TV stations, those were different. Savannah Guthrie said so herself. She stated publicly that she believed 2 of the notes were legitimate. 2 out of everything that came in. 2 that she looked at and felt, in whatever way a daughter feels these things, were real. And one of those stations, the CBS affiliate in Phoenix, confirmed something that had not been widely reported. When they looked back at the Bitcoin wallet connected to those letters, they found activity. On February 10th, a small amount of money had been placed into the account. And alongside it, a message. "We are ready to talk. Contact us," with a link for how to reach out. No one officially confirmed who sent it. But the answer, when you understand who is watching that wallet and how the FBI approaches negotiations in federal kidnapping cases, becomes very clear. That message was not from a family desperate to get their mother back. It was not from someone who panicked and reached out without a strategy. It was placed with intention, with training behind it, with a very specific goal that had nothing to do with handing over money and everything to do with forcing the other side into a conversation they could not control. And then the other side said nothing. That silence, that complete and total absence of any response after the channel was opened on February 10th, is not a dead end. It is the most revealing data point in this entire case. Because what the silence tells investigators is something that no ransom note, no demand, no deadline ever could. It tells them who they are dealing with. It tells them how that person thinks. And it tells them something about what this was really about from the very beginning. A genuine ransom operation does not go quiet when the other side reaches out. It escalates. It reminds you what is at stake. It sends proof. It keeps the pressure constant because the pressure is the entire mechanism. Every hour without a response is supposed to feel unbearable. That is how it works. That is how it has always worked. And none of that happened here. No proof of life was ever provided. Not a photograph. Not a recording. Not a single verifiable piece of evidence that Nancy was alive after she was taken from that house on the night of January 31st. The deadlines came and went. The FBI opened a line of communication, and the other side went completely silent, which means one of 2 things. Either the person behind those notes was never serious about a negotiation in the first place, or they realized, the moment that message appeared in the wallet, that the FBI was already closer than they thought. Both possibilities point to the same place, and that place is where this investigation has been quietly building toward for 87 days. The Bitcoin message was never about ransom, and Brian Entin knows it. The FBI knows it, and somewhere out there, the person who took Nancy Guthrie knows it too. To understand what that Bitcoin silence really meant, you have to step inside the mind of a negotiator. Not a hostage negotiator from a movie. Not someone working from emotion or instinct or the raw desperation of a family who just wants their person back. A federal negotiator. Someone trained to treat silence as information. Someone who understands that in a situation like this, the first side to show desperation loses everything. Steve Moore spent 25 years inside the FBI. He has worked cases that never made the news and cases that consumed it. And when he looked at the February 10th message at what it was and what it was not, he did not see a failed attempt at contact. He saw a strategy. The FBI was not begging. They were not reacting. They were establishing the terms of engagement. They were telling whoever was on the other side of that wallet, this is not a situation where you issue demands and we comply. We are both parties in this. We both have something to lose. And if you want anything from us, You are going to have a conversation. That is a power move disguised as an olive branch. And the other side recognized it, which is exactly why they said nothing. Because here is what experienced investigators understand about bad faith negotiations. When someone enters a situation with no intention of following through, the moment the other side demonstrates confidence, the whole game shifts. The leverage disappears. The carefully constructed pressure evaporates. And the person who thought they were holding all the cards suddenly realizes they are sitting across from people who have seen this before, who have trained for exactly this scenario, and who are not going to flinch.
They will not budge. If they come in and seem truly, yes, we desperately want her back, but we're not going to set a precedent for future crimes, things like this.
The ransom notes went to television stations. Think about that. A real ransom operation goes dark. It does not want cameras. It does not want reporters. It does not want the kind of national attention that puts federal agents on a case within hours. The entire strategy of a genuine ransom demand is to keep it small, keep it quiet, and keep the family isolated enough that they will pay just to make it stop. This went to TMZ. This went to local news affiliates. This exploded into one of the most covered missing persons cases in the country within days. And whoever sent those letters either did not understand what that visibility would do to their operation, or they wanted the visibility. They chose it on purpose. Both options are deeply revealing. If they did not understand, that tells you something about their experience, about how they think, about the gap between what they planned and what they understood about consequences. If they wanted the attention, that tells you something far more unsettling about what this was really designed to do. Because an operation built around attention is not built around money. Money is quiet. Attention is something else. No proof of life ever came. Not once. The first deadline passed on February 5th. Nothing. The second deadline passed on February 9th. Nothing. No photograph. No audio. No video. No verifiable confirmation that Nancy was alive after that 41-minute window closed at 2:28 in the morning on February 1st. Steve Moore called it negotiating in bad faith from day one. And that phrase carries more weight than it might seem. Because bad faith from the very beginning means the structure of this whole thing was never designed to succeed as a ransom operation. The notes, the deadlines, the Bitcoin wallet, the media strategy, none of it follows the pattern of people who actually wanted to get paid and walk away. It follows the pattern of something else. What that something else is, that is the question the FBI has been sitting with for 87 days. And the silence after February 10th did not close that question. It confirmed it. The channel was opened. The other side went dark. And in that darkness, investigators stopped asking whether the ransom was real and started building a case around the answer they were already leaning toward. The Bitcoin message was a test. And the silence was the result. Now consider what was happening on the ground in Tucson while all of this was unfolding. Because the ransom investigation was only one layer of this case. Underneath it, something had gone wrong in a way that most people following this story have not fully connected to everything else. It started with emails. More than 220 of them, obtained by Fox 10 in Phoenix. Those emails revealed that in the period leading up to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, the Pima County Sheriff's Department had been in active communication with producers from a reality television crew. The department had been coordinating with A&E for a show that would follow deputies, give cameras access to operations, go out on calls. The kind of thing that sounds like good publicity until you read what else was in those emails. Because buried inside that correspondence was something that, in retrospect, reads like a warning no one caught in time. A response from the department stated that they had experienced some rotational reassignments since the previous year. What that meant, when investigators began pulling the thread, was that the head of the cold case unit and the head of the homicide unit had both been moved out of their positions. The people with the most experience in the most serious cases had been rotated out before any of this began. And the reason, according to reporting on the sheriff's internal decisions, was political. Sheriff Chris Nanos had removed experienced leadership from key positions. People who had not supported him. People who, for reasons that had nothing to do with their professional record, had been reassigned away from the roles they had spent years building expertise in. Then Nancy Guthrie disappeared, and the lead investigator assigned to one of the most high-profile missing persons cases in the United States in 2026 had no prior homicide experience. Read that again. The lead investigator on this case had never worked a homicide before. In a case built on a 41-minute window, microscopic evidence, DNA transfer, trace materials that exist on a surface for hours before they begin to degrade, the person leading the charge had never navigated that kind of terrain before. Not once. And then the crime scene was released before investigators had finished processing it. That decision, that single procedural choice, carries consequences that extend far beyond the immediate investigation. Because once a crime scene has been released and re-entered, anything collected after that point becomes legally complicated. Defense attorneys can challenge it. Chain of custody becomes contested. Evidence that should have been definitive becomes arguable in front of a jury. The margin between conviction and reasonable doubt can hinge on exactly this kind of procedural breakdown. The Pima County Board of Supervisors voted unanimously to question Sheriff Nanos about how his department was being managed. A recall effort against him is now underway. But the most revealing detail is not the reality TV emails. It is not the inexperienced investigator. It is not even the early release of the crime scene. It is the hair. Hair samples were collected from Nancy's home. They were sent to a private forensics laboratory in Florida. And during that process, something became clear that exposed a level of dysfunction at the heart of this investigation that experienced agents found almost impossible to believe. The FBI had requested that evidence. They had asked for it. They had made the request formally, through proper channels, weeks before it was handed over. The Pima County Sheriff's Department did not send it. Not because it was unavailable. Not because there was a processing delay. But because, according to the information that eventually surfaced, there was active resistance to cooperating with the FBI's lab. The material was sent instead to a laboratory roughly 3,000 miles away from Quantico, in what appeared to be a direct decision to route the evidence away from federal hands. Steve Moore did not mince words about what that means. When the sheriff is involved in the details of a case to the point where he is personally influencing which lab receives critical evidence, that is not a management decision. That is an investigative decision. And an investigative decision made at that level, for reasons that have never been publicly explained, is the kind of thing that sits in a case file and eventually has to be answered for. The animosity between the Pima County Sheriff's Office and the FBI was not rumored. It was documented. It was visible. It affected the timeline of this investigation in ways that may never be fully known. But here is what is known. The FBI eventually got the evidence. The hair made its way to federal hands. And what happened next moved this case into territory that only a very small number of investigations in American criminal history have ever reached. The San Francisco lab. That is where this story takes a turn that changes the weight of everything. The laboratory in San Francisco that is now reportedly involved in the DNA analysis connected to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance is not a standard forensics facility. It is not the kind of lab that processes routine evidence from routine cases. It is the same laboratory that helped investigators identify Rex Heuermann, the man who pleaded guilty to the murders of 8 women on Long Island in the Gilgo Beach serial killer case. One of the most complex and long-running cold case investigations in recent American history. Cracked in significant part because of what that lab can do. What it does is called forensic genetic genealogy, and it operates on a completely different level than a standard DNA match. When investigators run a DNA sample through CODIS, the national database, they are looking for a direct match. Someone whose profile is already in the system. If that person has never been arrested, never been processed, never had their DNA entered into the database, CODIS comes back empty. The sample sits there. The case goes cold. Forensic genetic genealogy does not need a direct match. It builds a family tree. It takes partial DNA information, fragments that a standard test might discard as insufficient, and traces them through relatives. A cousin. A second cousin. A sibling who was once arrested for something minor 15 years ago. Someone in a genealogy database who submitted a sample to learn about their ancestry and never thought twice about it. The lab follows the biological thread through the family until it arrives at a person. And when it arrives, investigators have a name that the conventional system could never have produced. This is how Rex Heuermann was identified after years of silence. This is the method now being applied to Nancy Guthrie's case. The glove recovered approximately 2 meters from Nancy's home carried DNA from an unknown male. No Cody's match. The mixed DNA recovered from inside the house itself also returned no match. But a no match in Cody's is not a dead end anymore. Not when this lab is involved. Not when the same techniques that pulled a serial killer out of decades of anonymity are now focused on a 41-minute window in Tucson, Arizona. There is a question that has divided experienced investigators and retired profilers for weeks. Was Nancy taken by one person or two? It matters more than it might seem. One person acting alone implies familiarity. With Nancy, with the house, with the routine, with the layout in the dark. That level of comfort suggests a connection. Someone who did not need a second set of hands because they already knew what they were walking into. Two people suggests coordination. Planning between individuals. A shared motive or a paid arrangement. And with two people, the chance of a communication error increases. A detail shared with the wrong person. A conversation that should not have happened. A crack in the silence. Retired FBI profiler Jim Clemente argued for a single attacker. His reasoning was grounded in the blood evidence near the front porch. He made the case that the positioning suggested one person managing the entire situation alone, that if two people had been present, the logistics would have looked different. Steve Moore does not land in the same place. He said statistically it is more likely that two people were involved. He pointed to the difficulty of managing an adult against their will over any extended period of time with only one person. He noted that the famous kidnapping cases involving a single perpetrator almost always involved infants or very young children. Not a 73-year-old woman in the Catalina foothills. But he also said something that carries more weight than either position. He said you cannot put your weight down on the ice. Two experienced investigators. Two different conclusions. And neither one willing to commit fully. Because the evidence is not pointing cleanly in one direction yet. And the reason it is not pointing cleanly is the same reason this lab was brought in. The answer is in the DNA. And the DNA is still being processed. Former FBI Assistant Director John Miller offered a different lens entirely. He suggested that whoever planned this identified Nancy as someone relatively defenseless. Living alone. Vulnerable. And connected to someone with significant public profile and resources. That framing means the choice of Nancy was not random. She was selected. Specifically. Deliberately. Because of who she was connected to. Savannah Guthrie said it herself in her first public statement after her mother's disappearance. She said she fears her mother may have been targeted because of her own name. And then she said something that has stayed in this investigation from the very beginning. She said it is too much to bear to think that I brought this to her door. That it is because of me. That is not evidence. But it reflects what investigators have been quietly exploring for 87 days. The possibility that this was never about Nancy at all. That she was the path to someone else. And that someone else was Savannah. Now bring all of that together. The FBI has been building this case in silence. 87 days of controlled, deliberate, legally protected silence. And what has been built during that silence is not nothing. Nearly 40,000 public tips have come in across the course of this investigation. The reward currently stands at $1.1 million. $1 million from the Guthrie family. $100,000 from the FBI. 5 separate agencies are actively involved. The Pima County Sheriff's Department. The FBI. U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Federal prosecutors from the U.S. Attorney's Office in Tucson. And the Forensic Genetic Genealogy Lab in San Francisco that does not take ordinary cases. The masked suspect captured on the doorbell camera before it was disconnected was described as approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall, carrying an Ozark Trail 25-liter backpack, a product sold exclusively at Walmart. A gun holster was visible. The movement was deliberate, not rushed, not panicked. The walk of someone who had thought through what came next. Walmart records were subpoenaed in an attempt to trace that backpack. There is also a vehicle. A white or light-colored car that appears in the peripheral footage connected to the time frame of Nancy's disappearance. Steve Moore noted that in today's world, with the density of doorbell cameras in a neighborhood like the Catalina foothills, it is surprising that a clearer picture of that vehicle has not emerged publicly. But he also said something that reframes that surprise entirely. The FBI almost certainly has more than they have released. They always do. And they release only what needs to be released, only what serves the investigation at that specific moment. They are not a media organization. They are building a prosecution. And a prosecution requires precision, not press releases. Public trials, not public investigations. That distinction, drawn by Steve Moore from 25 years inside the Bureau, is the lens through which every piece of the last 87 days has to be understood. The silence was not absence. It was architecture. Every decision about what to release and what to hold back was made with a courtroom in mind. Every piece of evidence handled with chain of custody intact. Every lead followed in a way that leaves a clean, documented paper trail that a defense attorney cannot dismantle. And now consider what Brian Entin said. The FBI knows who took Nancy Guthrie. If that is accurate, and the people closest to this investigation are speaking in ways that suggest it is, then the current silence is not confusion. It is the final stage of a process that began the moment those agents walked into that house and saw her phone still on the table and her shoes still by the door and blood confirmed as hers on the front porch. They are almost ready. And when they move, they will not announce it in advance. Sheriff Nanos told investigators early in this case that he believed he knew the motive. He has never shared it publicly. That decision is either a deliberate protection of an active prosecution or one of the most consequential choices made in this entire case. Possibly both. Because a motive that is known but not spoken is a motive that is being saved for the moment it can do the most damage to someone sitting at a defense table. On day 87, Nancy Guthrie has not been found. No suspect has been named. The investigation is active. The DNA is at Quantico and in San Francisco, moving through testing that did not exist a few years ago. The case, according to those closest to it, is being prepared for trial. And somewhere between that February 10th message and the lab results still being processed, the answer already exists. It just has not been released yet. But here is what sits with you when you step back from all of it. Every detail. Every silence. Every deliberate, measured, carefully controlled moment of this investigation. Someone has been quiet for 87 days. Someone knows exactly what happened in that house between 1:47 and 2:28 in the morning. Someone disconnected that camera. Someone propped those back doors open. Someone moved through the Catalina foothills in the dark with a backpack and a plan and walked away. That person has been watching this case develop. Every news report, every episode, every retired agent who sat down and explained why the silence means what it means. That person has been watching. And the FBI has been watching back. Cases like this do not stay unresolved permanently. Evidence degrades, but it does not disappear. People talk. Mistakes surface. And the kind of preparation happening right now, across multiple agencies, in the most advanced forensic labs in the country, is not the kind of preparation you do when you have nothing. It is the kind you do when you are almost ready. In the next episode, there is a detail about the DNA evidence from Nancy's home that has not been fully reported anywhere. A specific finding from the forensic process that investigators have kept out of public statements for a reason. When that detail comes out, it will reframe everything about who was in that house and why they were there. Do not miss it.